Hello everybody, welcome in. I'd like to welcome everybody to Precalculus. So from this point forward, we are now beginning the Precalculus course. So I just want to start out by thanking everybody who's been with me since the very beginning, all the way since when I started teaching Basic Math 1 back in December of 2024. Wow, has it really been that long? Yeah, December 2024. And then those of you who have followed more recently, even who have subscribed to me more recently, I really appreciate it. And at any point in between, anyone who's subscribed, I also thank you too. I love you all. You all are amazing. And to any who are seeing this and in the future are considering subscribing, I do appreciate that too. And if this has helped you in any way, please consider subscribing to the channel. It is totally free. It won't cost you anything to subscribe, to get those notifications. So thank you everybody again. You all have been amazing. So having said that, let's talk about Precalculus. So forewarning, a lot of this is going to seem a lot like Algebra 2 Trig rehashed all over again. And the reason for that is because this is basically the final course before you go into calculus. The very next course, the next welcome video I'm going to have is Welcome to Calculus 1, which will be many months from now. But by time you get to Calculus 1, it's assumed that you are an expert at algebra, you're an expert at basic trigonometry, you don't need to review it, you're ready to apply what you've learned into calculus material. So that is why Precalculus is structured the way it is, whether you're in a high school or in a university somewhere. Now, here's the thing also. I taught Algebra 2 Trig based on the high school model because you get exposure to trigonometry. Now, in colleges, the equivalent course to that is college algebra, where they teach all the Algebra 2 side of things, but the problem with that is they don't usually do any trig. I'm sure there's universities out there where they do have an equivalent Algebra 2 trig course, but at the ones I've seen in my area, they strictly teach the Algebra 2 side of it and don't do any trig. That's not until you take Precalculus, which comes after that. And the problem I find with that is, you go on, you complete your college algebra course or an Algebra 2 course, you go into pre-calc, that's your first exposure to trig, and you're already like, huh? And then you go through pre-calc, you're dumped into Calculus 1 saying, here you go, good luck. You've only had one exposure to trig. I'm not a big fan of that. I believe you need to have at least 2 exposures to trigonometry and those type of functions and graphing them and be really good and grasp it before you can comfortably take on a calculus course. So, having said that, I'm probably going to go through the Algebra 2 side of this course a little quicker because I'm assuming by you coming into Precalculus, you have a decent grasp on the Algebra 2 stuff. We're still going to go through it, but it won't be as in-depth as Algebra 2 Trig. And if you ever need that stuff, there is no shame in it. You can always go back and watch my Algebra 2 Trig videos. In fact, I have all the way back from Basic 1 up through Algebra 2 Trig and now starting into Precalculus. All those videos are there. They are totally free. At any time you need it, feel free to watch it, pause it, take notes, do whatever you need to do to help yourself. So those videos will be there forever. I have no problem leaving those up. Now, a big misconception too that people make is that Precalculus only prepares you for Calculus 1. That's not entirely true. It definitely prepares you for Calculus 1, but the idea is to prepare you for everything that comes after Precalculus. So we're talking Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3, and then after Calc 3, you go on to take a course called Linear Algebra, which is very much into matrices and systems of equations, but even deeper than what we do in an Algebra 2 or Pre-Calc course. Differential equations, stuff like that. So and abstract algebra, so on. So this is very much basically a last chance review course with some new material. There are some new things that were not taught in Algebra 2 Trig. Now, on the trigonometry part of the course, I'm probably going to spend more time on that, because if you're taking this at the university level, you probably only have, this will probably be your only exposure to trig. So I need to do you that service. So if you're taking this from high school coming into pre-calc, I apologize if you've seen a lot of this trig stuff already, but we have to keep in mind, for a pre-calc course, it's about a 50-50 split. Half the students have had exposure to trigonometry, half of them haven't. So we need to reach everyone. That's my goal. So, but we will see some new material. And the book I'm using, if you're wondering, I need to start doing that at the beginning of every course, is Precalculus with Limits, a Graphing Approach by Larson, Hostetler, and Edwards, 5th edition. This is a very, very good book. It really has a lot of great material in it that will cover everything we need. So you're probably wondering, what topics are we going to cover in this course? Well, I have a list here. Definitely, and what we're going to start with are functions and their graphs. So some real basic fundamental stuff that we'll kind of just go through. We'll talk about inverse functions again, function operations such as sums, differences, products, quotients, and composition of functions. We'll talk about quadratic and polynomial functions and their graphs. We'll talk about real zeros and complex numbers. We'll talk about rational functions and asymptotes and their graphs. We'll talk about exponential functions and logarithmic functions and their graphs, and solving equations. And I want to emphasize, graphing is going to be very much a thing in this course. This is a very graphing intensive course, so be prepared to see a lot more graphing occurring. We will talk about trigonometric functions and their graphs. We'll do some right triangle trigonometry. We'll do some inverse trig functions. We'll do some analytic trigonometry. We'll do the law of sines, the law of cosines. But then here's something different. We'll get into vectors. We didn't really go into that in Algebra 2 Trig. We'll talk about vectors and some vector operations. We'll find the dot product of vectors, go into what those are. We'll talk about the trigonometric form of complex numbers. So the trigonometric form is something called de Moivre's theorem, which we'll learn in pre-calculus. That's kind of a nice thing for, let's say you had the quantity of I plus 1 raised to the 20th power. Are you really going to want to use the binomial theorem and expand it to the 20th power and simplify the result that way? Probably not. This de Moivre's theorem is something much nicer. It uses sine and cosine, it uses trig, but it really is so much nicer than trying to use the binomial theorem and expand it. It's a much easier way. We'll get into some systems of equations and matrices and matrix operations again. We'll do some more sequence and series. You'll see that. You'll see something new called mathematical induction, which is a type of proof. It starts bordering into more discrete math, which eventually I will teach discrete math. That'll be before we teach fundamentals of advanced math, which will prepare you to go into abstract algebra and advanced calculus. We'll do the binomial theorem again. We'll dive deeper into conic sections again, but we're going to talk about something in that also called eccentricity and the polar form of conic sections. We'll get into parametric equations once again. Then we're going to do something new called polar coordinates and polar graphs. So if you like graphing, wait until we get into graphing and polar coordinates. You're going to get some really cool shapes with that. Like, you can get graphs that look like figure eights or hearts or flower petals based on polar coordinates. There's some, I think that's called a lemniscate. That's what that would be, but it's really pretty cool. Then we're going to get into the 3D coordinate system. So yes, we'll do some 3D graphing. So we'll get the 3D midpoint formula, the 3D distance formula. We'll talk about vectors in space, and we'll talk about the cross product of vectors. We'll talk about lines and planes in space. We'll talk, and then after that, for the final segment of the course, we're going to really kind of start into calculus a little bit. We'll talk about limits and what they are. We'll talk about infinite limits and asymptotes. We'll do tangent line problems, which are very big in calculus. We'll even do derivatives, which, when we do derivatives, we're only going to learn the formal definition of a derivative in this course, and unfortunately do it the long way. The shortcuts will come in the Calculus 1 course, but for pre-calc, we're only going to teach you the long way, the definition way. And then we'll even get into some area problems, which foreshadows integration in calculus. So those are all the topics we are going to discuss in pre-calculus. I'm probably figuring we're going to be on this well until the fall. Probably a better part of the year will be on pre-calculus, but it's very necessary for what we need to do. So once again, I want to apologize if this seems like a throwback to Algebra 2 Trig, but there are some different things in it, and this is very necessary so you can go forward and do well in calculus, because calculus breaks down into algebra and trig. And if you struggle with those, you're going to struggle in calculus. So that's why it's so important to cover this material once again. So having said that, the very first lesson for the next video, which will be in pre-calc that we're going to kick off, are just going to be lines in the plane. So it'll be a real simple lesson. So I hope everyone has a great day. Take care.